The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Jasmine's apartment as she carefully applied her makeup in the bathroom mirror. Today wasn't just any ordinary workday. Hidden beneath her calm exterior was a bubbling excitement she could barely contain. After 15 years of working in restaurants, starting as a dishwasher at 16, moving to busser, then line cook, and finally server, Jasmine Williams had secretly secured a loan to buy Bellamy's, the upscale restaurant where she'd been waitressing for the past 5 years. Only Mr. Bellamy himself knew about the deal. The aging owner had taken Jasmine under his wing, recognizing something special in her from the start. He'd shared his business knowledge generously, letting her study the books after closing time and teaching her the finer points of restaurant management during slow afternoons. Just a few more days, Jasmine whispered to her reflection, smoothing down her crisp white shirt. The paperwork would be finalized on Monday, and then she would officially own the restaurant where she'd spent countless hours serving others. She couldn't help the smile that spread across her face as she imagined the looks of surprise when the staff found out. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa, the floor manager. "Table 12 requested you again." The Johnson anniversary couple. Jasmine's smile widened. The Johnsons came to Bellamy's every year to celebrate their anniversary, and for the past 4 years they had specifically asked for her as their server. These relationships with regulars were what made the job special. 40 minutes later, Jasmine pushed through the staff entrance of Bellamy's, greeted by the familiar scents of fresh bread and simmering sauces. The lunch shift was just winding down and the dinner crew was beginning to arrive. Bellamy's occupied the ground floor of a restored 19th century building, with high ceilings, gleaming wood floors, and expansive windows that filled the space with natural light during the day and reflected the warm, interior glow at night. "There she is," called Deshawn from behind the bar, where he was cutting fresh fruit for garnishes. "How's my favorite server this fine Thursday?" "Can't complain," Jasmine replied, hanging up her light jacket in the small staff room. "How was lunch?" "Steady but not crazy. Though that food critic from the Tribune was in again. 3rd time this month." Jasmine nodded, mentally filing away this information. The review would probably come out after she took ownership, something to prepare for. The evening began smoothly. Jasmine greeted the Johnsons with genuine warmth, remembering details about their grandchildren and Mr. Johnson's recent retirement. She moved efficiently between her other tables, anticipating needs before guests had to ask, suggesting wine pairings with a knowledge that came from years of studying on her own time. Around 8 o'clock, as the restaurant reached its full evening capacity, the host seated a party of 4 business people in Jasmine's section. She recognized one of them immediately. Richard Thompson, a semi-regular who usually came for power lunches but occasionally appeared for dinner with clients. He was known among the staff for being particular to the point of rudeness, especially after his second martini. Jasmine approached the table with professional warmth. "Good evening and welcome to Bellamy's. My name is Jasmine and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with sparkling or still water for the table?" Richard barely glanced up from his phone. "Still, room temperature. No ice, no lemon." The dismissive tone was familiar to Jasmine. He spoke to servers as if they were voice-activated machines rather than people. The woman to his right, wearing a tailored navy suit, gave Jasmine an apologetic smile. "Sparkling would be lovely for me, thank you." Jasmine noted the order on her pad, along with Richard's particular water preference. "I'll be right back with your water and to tell you about our specials this evening." As she walked away, she could hear Richard talking loudly about a deal his firm had just closed, his voice pitched to carry to nearby tables. Jasmine exchanged a knowing glance with Tyler, the young host who was seating another party. Richard was clearly in show-off mode tonight. When she returned with the water, precisely as ordered, Richard was still talking. She waited patiently for a pause before beginning to describe the evening's specials, but he held up a hand to stop her. "The table is wobbly," he announced, rocking it slightly to demonstrate. "This is unacceptable." Jasmine nodded. "I'm so sorry about that, sir. Let me fix it for you right away." She knelt down and examined the table legs, finding where the unevenness was coming from. With practiced movements, she adjusted the leveling foot at the bottom of one leg. "Is that better?" she asked, standing up. Richard tested the table with his hand, rocking it more forcefully than necessary. "I suppose it will do." His tone suggested he was granting a massive favor by accepting the repair. "Now what's good here tonight? And don't just recite the specials. I want to know what's actually worth ordering." Jasmine maintained her professional demeanor, despite the condescending tone. "The chef has done something special with the duck breast tonight. It's served with a port and cherry reduction that balances the richness perfectly, and the halibut is exceptional, brought in fresh this morning." Richard responded, clearly unimpressed by her expertise. "I'll have the bone-in ribeye, medium rare, and don't bring it out medium or medium well. I know the difference, unlike some of your other customers." "Of course, sir. Our kitchen is very precise with temperatures." She took the rest of the table's orders, noting how Richard's colleagues seemed slightly embarrassed by his behavior. The woman in the navy suit mouthed a silent thank you as Jasmine collected the menus. Throughout the meal, Richard found reasons to criticize: the spacing of the silverware, the temperature of the bread, the timing between courses. Each time, Jasmine addressed his concerns professionally, never letting her growing irritation show on her face. She had dealt with difficult customers before. They were part of the job, especially in fine dining where some guests mistook paying for a meal as paying for submission. As she cleared the main course plates, Richard's voice rose again. He had moved on to his third martini and was louder than before. "I don't know why they keep hiring people who clearly don't understand fine dining," he said, gesturing in Jasmine's direction as she balanced the stack of plates. "Maybe you'd be better suited for somewhere more casual." The table fell silent. One of his colleagues coughed uncomfortably. The woman in the navy suit stared down at her lap. Jasmine paused, the heavy plate steady in her hands. She could feel nearby tables quieting as well, the uncomfortable silence spreading like ripples in a pond. For a moment, she imagined telling Richard that in just a few days she would own this restaurant. She imagined the shock on his face, the stammered apologies, the humiliation. Instead, she simply smiled. "I'll check on your dessert order in a moment. Can I bring anyone coffee while you decide?" As she walked away, she could hear the woman in the navy suit quietly scolding Richard. Was that really necessary? She's been nothing but professional all evening. "I have standards," Richard replied, not bothering to lower his voice. "And I'm not going to apologize for them." In the kitchen, Jasmine took a deep breath as she set down the plates. Chef Dan raised an eyebrow at her. "Thompson giving you a hard time?" he asked, having overheard the earlier complaints when she'd relayed his specific steak temperature requests. "Nothing I can't handle," Jasmine replied, straightening her shoulders. "Just 3 more days." Chef Dan was one of the few staff members who had guessed something was happening. He hadn't figured out the full story yet, but he'd noticed the extra hours Jasmine had been putting in with Mr. Bellamy, the hushed conversations, the unusual meetings with men in suits who definitely weren't typical restaurant patrons. 3 more days until what? He asked, curiosity getting the better of him. Jasmine just smiled. "Until my weekend, chef. It's been a long week." She returned to Richard's table with dessert menus, finding the group now discussing a client they were courting. Richard had shifted his focus away from criticizing the restaurant and back to impressing his colleagues with his business acumen. Jasmine took their dessert orders efficiently, grateful for the change in his attention. When the check came, Richard handed over his credit card without even glancing at the total. As a final power play, he left exactly 15% tip, not insultingly low, but precisely calculated to be less than the 20% standard for fine dining, a message that the service had been merely adequate in his estimation. As the group prepared to leave, the woman in the navy suit lingered behind, waiting until Richard had stepped outside to speak to Jasmine. "I'm sorry about my colleague," she said quietly. "Some people think being difficult is the same thing as having high standards." Jasmine appreciated the gesture. "Thank you, but please don't worry. It's part of the job." "It shouldn't be," the woman replied, then hurried to join the others outside. Jasmine watched through the window as they climbed into a waiting car, Richard still talking animatedly, likely unaware that his behavior had made any impression at all. In his world, servers existed only to serve, their humanity secondary to their function. If he only knew, she thought, allowing herself a small moment of satisfaction as she imagined Monday's revelation. She turned back to the dining room, to her other tables where guests were enjoying their meals without needing to make others feel small. Mr. Bellamy caught her eye from across the restaurant and gave her a subtle nod. Part sympathy, part reminder of what was coming. Jasmine nodded back, her determination renewed. In just a few days, everything would change, and Richard Thompson would learn that the person he had dismissed so casually was about to become the owner of his favorite restaurant. The next evening arrived, with a gentle rain that left the streets glistening under the restaurant's warm exterior lights. Jasmine arrived early for her shift, her thoughts already racing with ideas for the changes she would implement once the ownership paperwork was finalized. She hung her rain jacket in the staff room, smoothed down her crisp white shirt, and tied her apron with practiced hands. Last Friday as a waitress, her coworker Deshaun said with a knowing smile as he prepared drink orders at the bar. He was one of the few staff members Mr. Bellamy had trusted with the news. Jasmine pressed a finger to her lips. Shh, not yet. But she couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. After 15 years of working her way up from dishwasher to line cook to server, while putting herself through business school at night, she was about to achieve her dream. The dinner service began smoothly, the restaurant filling with the pleasant hum of conversation and the subtle clinking of silverware against fine china. Jasmine moved between her tables with the grace that came from years of experience, remembering each guest's preferences, anticipating needs before they arose. Then the door opened and Jasmine's stomach tightened. Richard Thompson walked in, his expensive suit perfectly tailored, his hand resting on the back of a woman in a business dress who clearly wasn't his wife. Jasmine recognized the woman as Catherine Wells, a potential client Richard had been trying to win over for months. Several staff members exchanged glances. Richard's reputation preceded him. The host began leading them toward a table in Jasmine's section, and she took a deep breath, preparing herself for another difficult interaction. She could handle one more night of Richard's behavior. Come Monday, everything would change. As Richard spotted her, his expression soured. He stopped the host with a hand on his arm. "Is this our section?" he asked loudly, making no attempt to lower his voice. "I specifically requested a table in Gregory's section." The host, a college student named Tyler who had only been working at Bellamy's for 2 months, looked flustered. "I'm sorry, sir, but Gregory isn't working tonight, and this is our last available table for 2. Richard's eyes narrowed as they locked onto Jasmine. "Then I'd like a different server. Anyone but her." Tyler glanced helplessly toward the manager's station. "I'll see what I can do, sir." Catherine, Richard's guest, looked uncomfortable, her eyes darting between Richard and Jasmine. "Is there a problem? The table looks lovely." "Trust me," Richard said with a dismissive wave. "You want the best experience here, and that means the right staff. Some people just aren't cut out for fine dining." Heat rose to Jasmine's cheeks, but her expression remained professional. 15 years in the industry had taught her how to wear a mask, how to swallow insults and keep moving. Still, knowing what Monday would bring made it harder, not easier, to tolerate his behavior. Lisa, the floor manager, appeared at Tyler's side. She knew about the ownership change but had promised Jasmine to keep it quiet and treat these last shifts normally. "Is there an issue with the table, Mr. Thompson?" Lisa asked. "The table is fine." "The server isn't," Richard replied coldly. "Surely you can accommodate a valued customer's request." Lisa hesitated, looking at Jasmine with an apologetic expression. Jasmine gave a slight nod. It wasn't worth making a scene, not tonight. "Of course. Mr. Thompson, Zoe will be your server this evening," Lisa said, gesturing to another waitress who was passing by. Catherine frowned slightly. "Really, Richard, this seems unnecessary." "Trust me," he interrupted, placing his hand on her back to guide her to the table. "I know this place inside and out. Been coming here for years." He pulled out Catherine's chair with exaggerated courtesy, then leaned toward her. "It's important to establish standards," he said, loud enough for Jasmine to hear as she served a nearby table. "People need to know their place." Catherine didn't look convinced, but she sat down, glancing apologetically in Jasmine's direction. Throughout the evening, Richard seemed determined to make his presence known whenever Jasmine passed near his table. He would pause his conversation to watch her critically, making comments just loud enough for her to hear. "The service has really gone downhill here lately," he remarked, as Jasmine delivered appetizers to a table of elderly guests celebrating their anniversary. "Some people just don't have what it takes," he said, as she efficiently cleared dishes from another table. Each time, Jasmine maintained her composure, focusing on providing excellent service to her own customers. many of whom were regulars who specifically requested her section. They valued her encyclopedic knowledge of the menu, her honest recommendations, and the way she remembered their preferences from visit to visit. The evening progressed, the restaurant reaching its peak dinner rush. Jasmine balanced 3 entrees on a large tray, navigating carefully between tables in the crowded dining room. As she passed behind Richard's chair, he suddenly pushed back without looking, causing her to swerve sharply to avoid him. The sudden movement threw off her balance. While she managed to keep the plates on the tray, her elbow bumped against Richard's chair. Richard reacted as if she had dumped the entire tray on him. "For heaven's sake!" he exclaimed, making a show of checking his suit jacket for stains, though nothing had spilled. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Completely unprofessional." The restaurant grew quiet, heads turning toward the commotion. Jasmine steadied her tray, her knuckles white from gripping it tightly. "I apologize for bumping your chair, sir," she said evenly. "No harm done. No harm." Richard stood up, his face reddening. "You nearly ruined a $5,000 suit. This is why some people should stick to diners and fast food joints." Catherine looked mortified. "Richard, please. It was an accident. Your suit is fine." But Richard was on a roll, perhaps showing off what he thought was his influence. "I want to speak to management about this. The standards at Bellamy's used to mean something." Lisa appeared almost instantly, having watched the situation unfold. "Is there a problem, Mr. Thompson?" "This," he gestured dismissively at Jasmine. "Waitress nearly caused a disaster. I've been coming here for 7 years and I've never seen such incompetence." The entire restaurant was listening now. Jasmine felt dozens of eyes on her as she stood perfectly still, the heavy tray still balanced in her hands, the food getting cold. Lisa stepped forward. "Mr. Thompson, I observed what happened. It was clearly an accident caused by unexpected movement in a crowded space. Jasmine is one of our most experienced staff members." "Well, experience clearly isn't translating to quality," Richard scoffed. "And this isn't the first issue. Maybe it's time Bellamy reconsidered his hiring practices. People like her are the reason this restaurant's reputation is suffering." The implication in his words hung in the air, uncomfortable and ugly. Several diners looked away, embarrassed to be witnessing such a scene. Others frowned disapprovingly at Richard. An older couple at one of Jasmine's tables, regulars who had been coming to Bellamy's for decades, exchanged glances. The woman stood up, her silver hair catching the light. "Young man," she addressed Richard, her voice carrying the authority of someone not accustomed to being ignored. "My husband and I have dined here every anniversary for 32 years. Ms. Williams has served us flawlessly for the past 5. If anyone is damaging this establishment's reputation at the moment, I'm afraid it's not her." Several other diners murmured in agreement. Catherine looked like she wanted to disappear, sliding lower in her seat. Richard's face flushed deeper, but he wasn't one to back down easily. "I'm entitled to expect certain standards when I'm paying premium prices," he insisted, though some of the wind had left his sails. "And we're entitled to enjoy our meals without this disruption," the older gentleman added, standing beside his wife. "Ms. Williams, I believe those entrees were heading to the Johnsons' table. Please don't let them get cold on our account." With a grateful nod, Jasmine continued to her destination, delivering the meals with her usual warmth and attention to detail, though her hands trembled slightly as she set down each plate. Richard sat back down, his jaw clenched tight. The conversation with his client strained for the remainder of the evening. When it came time for the check, he overtipped ostentatiously, as if the extra money somehow justified his behavior. As he left, he nodded curtly to Lisa. "I'll be back for my usual Monday lunch reservation. Perhaps by then we can discuss proper service standards." What Richard didn't know was that come Monday, the person setting those standards would be Jasmine herself. She watched him leave, already planning how she would handle their next encounter. Not as a waitress he could belittle, but as the owner of the establishment he claimed to love. Monday morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the tall windows of Bellamy's. For the first time in 5 years, Jasmine walked through the front door instead of the staff entrance. Her hand trembled slightly as she turned her key in the lock, her key to her restaurant. She took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar sense of polished wood, fresh linens, and the faint trace of last night's special. But today everything felt different. Today it was hers. Mr. Bellamy was already inside, dressed in a well-worn but perfectly tailored suit, arranging champagne flutes on the bar. His face brightened when he saw her. "There she is," he called out, arms spreading wide. "The new captain of the ship!" Jasmine couldn't help but smile as she crossed the dining room floor. At 67, Albert Bellamy still moved with the energy of a man 20 years younger, but the lines around his eyes had deepened over the past year. He'd been running Bellamy's for nearly 4 decades, and though he never said it directly, Jasmine knew how much it meant to him that she would carry on his legacy. "I still can't believe it's happening," Jasmine said, running her fingers along the smooth edge of a nearby table. "Keep expecting to wake up." "Believe it," Mr. Bellamy replied, handing her a thick envelope. "All signed, sealed, and delivered. The bank confirmed the transfer this morning. Bellamy's is officially yours." Jasmine opened the envelope with careful fingers, sliding out the papers that confirmed her ownership. She'd read the documents a dozen times during the negotiation process, but seeing the final versions with all the signatures made it real in a way nothing else had. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Mr. Bellamy assured her, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Just don't change the name." My ego couldn't take it. They both laughed, breaking the moment of solemnity. The restaurant had been Bellamy's for 40 years, and neither of them wanted that to change. They had agreed early in their negotiations that the name was staying, even as ownership changed hands. "The staff will be here at 10, Mr. Bellamy reminded her, glancing at his watch. "Should give us about 15 minutes to get everything ready." Together, they finished arranging champagne, flutes, and setting out a small spread of pastries from the local bakery. Mr. Bellamy had insisted on making this morning special, a proper handover ceremony for the staff to witness. "Nervous?" he asked as they heard the first employees arriving at the back door. "Terrified," Jasmine admitted. "What if they don't want to work for me?" "They already do work for you," he pointed out with a wink. "They just don't know it yet. And trust me, they'll be thrilled. You're one of them. You understand their challenges in a way I never could." Even after 40 years, the staff filed in gradually, curious expressions on their faces as they noticed the champagne and pastries. Most of them were dressed in their usual work clothes, ready for the Monday prep that would begin after whatever announcement Mr. Bellamy had planned. They gathered in a loose semicircle, exchanging questioning glances. Deshawn stood near the back, giving Jasmine a subtle thumbs up. Lisa, the floor manager, looked around nervously, one of the few who knew what was coming. Tyler, the young host who had dealt with Richard's rudeness on Friday night, stood by the door fidgeting with his tie. When everyone had arrived, all 23 staff members, from the executive chef to the newest dishwasher, Mr. Bellamy cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming in a bit early today," he began. "As you know, I've been running this restaurant for 4 decades now, and not looking a day over 30, called out Louis, the pastry chef who had been with Bellamy's almost as long as Albert himself. Everyone laughed, breaking the tension. Mr. Bellamy smiled. "Flattery will get you a raise, Louis, but not from me, not anymore." He paused, letting his words sink in. "As of this morning, I am officially retired." A murmur ran through the group. While Mr. Bellamy had occasionally mentioned retirement over the years, he'd always brushed it off as something for the distant future. "Don't look so worried," he continued. "Bellamy's isn't going anywhere. In fact, I'm certain its best days are still ahead, because I didn't sell to some corporate chain or outside investor. I wanted someone who loves this place as much as I do, someone who understands what makes it special." His eyes found Jasmine, and he gestured for her to join him. Confused looks passed between staff members as Jasmine stepped forward to stand beside Mr. Bellamy. "Most of you have worked with Jasmine Williams for years," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've seen her dedication, her attention to detail, and her incredible work ethic. What you might not know is that while serving your tables, Jasmine was also completing her business degree, or that she spent her days off developing a comprehensive 5-year plan for Bellamy's future, or that she secured financing from 3 different banks who were fighting for the chance to back her vision." The room had gone completely silent, all eyes fixed on Jasmine. "It is my great pleasure," Mr. Bellamy continued, his voice thick with emotion, "to introduce you to the new owner of Bellamy's restaurant, Jasmine Williams." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Deshawn started clapping, and suddenly the room erupted in cheers. Lisa rushed forward to hug Jasmine. The executive chef, a usually stoic man who rarely showed emotion, wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. Speech, someone called out, and others took up the cry. Jasmine felt her chest tighten with emotion as she looked at the faces surrounding her, people she'd worked alongside for years, some who had trained her, others whom she had trained. "I don't have anything prepared," she began hesitantly. "Then speak from the heart," Mr. Bellamy encouraged her. Jasmine nodded, taking a deep breath. "When I first walked through the door of this restaurant 15 years ago, I was 16 years old and desperate for any job that would hire me. I didn't know the difference between champagne and sparkling wine. I couldn't pronounce half the menu items." She smiled at the memory. "But from day one, Bellamy's felt like home." She looked around at each face. "Every one of you has taught me something important. Whether it was Louis showing me how to plate a dessert, or Chef Dan letting me observe in the kitchen during breaks, or Lisa teaching me how to handle difficult customers with grace." A few knowing looks passed between staff members, no doubt thinking of Richard Thompson and Friday's incident. "I didn't start out dreaming of owning a restaurant," Jasmine continued. "That dream grew alongside me, shaped by all of you and by this place. I've spent 5 years as a server here, watching, learning, and planning. Now I have the chance to take everything I've learned and build on the incredible foundation Mr. Bellamy created." She turned to the older man, her voice softening. "I promise to honor what you've built while helping it grow. Bellamy's best qualities, its warmth, its excellence, its sense of family, those will never change." Mr. Bellamy nodded, visibly moved. He reached for the champagne bottle and began filling glasses which were passed around the circle. "To Jasmine," he proposed, raising his glass, "and to the future of Bellamy's." "To Jasmine," the staff echoed, lifting their glasses. As they sipped their champagne and began to ask questions about her plans, the front door chimed unexpectedly. Everyone turned to see who would be arriving so early, an hour before opening. Richard Thompson stood in the doorway, briefcase in hand, looking confused at the gathering before him. He was dressed in another expensive suit, his hair perfectly combed, clearly ready for his regular Monday business lunch. He had arrived early, as was his habit, to secure his preferred table and sometimes to chat with Mr. Bellamy, who he considered something of a peer. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the champagne glasses and celebratory atmosphere, before landing on Mr. Bellamy. "What's the occasion?" he asked stiffly, looking past Jasmine as if she weren't there. His tone suggested mild irritation at not being included in whatever celebration was taking place at his restaurant. Mr. Bellamy stepped forward, still holding his champagne flute, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Richard." Perfect timing. "I was just introducing everyone to the new owner of Bellamy's." He turned to Jasmine, his smile growing wider. "Though I believe you two have already met." Richard's expression froze, his eyes darting between Mr. Bellamy and Jasmine as the meaning of the words sank in. The color drained from his face as he remembered every cutting remark, every dismissive glance, every time he had treated her as somehow beneath him. "The new owner?" he repeated, his voice barely audible. "That's right," Mr. Bellamy confirmed, placing his arm around Jasmine's shoulders. "As of this morning, Jasmine Williams is the sole proprietor of Bellamy's restaurant. I couldn't have found a more qualified person to carry on the legacy." Around them, the staff watched in silent fascination. Many had witnessed Richard's behavior over the years, and particularly the incident just 3 days ago. No one moved to help him in his obvious discomfort. Jasmine stepped forward, extending her hand professionally. "Mr. Thompson, I believe your usual table will be ready for you at noon, as always." Richard stared at her outstretched hand as if it might bite him, the realization of his new reality washing over his face in a wave of complicated emotions. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Richard's hand slowly rose to meet Jasmine's, his fingers limp and clammy against her firm grip. His face had cycled through a range of emotions, shock, disbelief, embarrassment, before settling into something that resembled a pained smile. "Congratulations," he managed to say, the words sticking in his throat. "What a surprise." "Thank you," Jasmine replied evenly, her voice neither cold nor particularly warm. Professional. The voice of someone who now held power but wasn't flaunting it. Behind her, the staff watched with varying expressions, some barely hiding their satisfaction, others simply curious about how this uncomfortable scene would play out. Mr. Bellamy observed with the slight smile of someone who had orchestrated a perfect ending to his own story. I've always admired your attention to detail, Richard continued, his words tumbling out faster now as if he could somehow rewrite the past 3 days, or the past 7 years, with a sudden flood of compliments. The way you run your section so efficiently. I should have recognized management potential when I saw it. A few staff members exchanged glances. They had all witnessed Richard's behavior over the years, his casual cruelty disguised as high standards. No one was fooled by this abrupt change of tune. I do hope you'll continue to be a part of the Bellamy's family, Jasmine said, her tone measured. She wasn't going to make this easy for him, but she wasn't going to humiliate him either. That wasn't her style. Your Monday lunch reservation remains a fixture in our books. Richard nodded too quickly, still struggling to find solid footing in this new reality. Of course. I've been coming here for years. Wouldn't dream of changing that. He glanced at his watch, though everyone knew he was early for his usual reservation. I should probably come back later. Let you finish your celebration. Actually, Jasmine said, if you have a moment, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the new seasonal menu we're developing. As a longtime customer, your input would be valuable. It was an olive branch, not offered out of weakness, but from a position of strength. Jasmine didn't need to push him away to prove her power. She could afford to be gracious. Richard blinked, clearly not expecting this. I'd be happy to, he said, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Mr. Bellamy stepped forward. Why don't you use your office, Jasmine? He corrected himself with a smile. I'll make sure the staff gets started on lunch preparations. Jasmine nodded and gestured toward the back of the restaurant. This way, Mr. Thompson. As they walked past the staff, Richard kept his eyes forward, avoiding the gazes he could feel on his back. The short walk to the office felt like crossing a stage with a spotlight tracking his every move. Jasmine's new office was still mostly filled with Mr. Bellamy's belongings. A few cardboard boxes sat in one corner, ready for him to pack decades of memories. The large mahogany desk dominated the room, its surface cleared except for a single folder. The restaurant's ownership papers, please. Have a seat, Jasmine said, indicating one of the leather chairs across from the desk. She didn't immediately take the seat behind the desk, her seat now, instead perching on the edge of the desk itself, reducing some of the formality of the situation. Richard sat stiffly, placing his briefcase on the floor beside him. I want to apologize for Friday night, he began, jumping straight to what he knew needed to be addressed. And well, for other occasions where I might have been less than courteous. Less than courteous, Jasmine repeated quietly, letting the understatement hang in the air between them. Richard had the decency to look ashamed. I behaved badly, he admitted. There's no excuse for it. And yet I suspect you have one prepared. He looked up, startled by her directness, then gave a small, rueful laugh. I deserve that. He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly groomed hair, mussing it slightly. The truth is, I've always seen this restaurant as an extension of myself. The place I bring clients to impress them. The place where the staff knows my name and my preferences. Where I feel important, he shook his head. Somewhere along the way, I started believing I was doing the restaurant a favor by being here, rather than the other way around. Jasmine studied him for a moment. She had served enough businessmen like Richard to recognize when someone was being genuine versus when they were just saying what they thought you wanted to hear. To her surprise, she sensed he was actually reflecting on his behavior, not just performing remorse. Bellamy's has always been a place where people come to feel special, she said. There's nothing wrong with wanting that. But no one gets to feel special at the expense of someone else's dignity. Richard nodded slowly. I understand that now. He hesitated before adding, though I have to admit I'm curious how you kept this so quiet. I pride myself on knowing everything that happens in this city's business community. The corner of Jasmine's mouth twitched upward. Perhaps that's a lesson too, Mr. Thompson. Important things happen every day that aren't on your radar. He acknowledged this with a tilt of his head. So what happens now? He asked, the question layered with meaning. Was she going to ban him? Make an example of him? He had seen enough ownership changes in restaurants to know that new beginnings often meant cutting ties with old problems. Now, Jasmine stood and walked around to take her seat behind the desk, a small but significant movement that seemed to finalize the transfer of power. Now we talk about those seasonal menu changes. I'm considering introducing a few dishes that reflect more diverse culinary traditions while maintaining Bellamy's signature style. Richard looked relieved at the professional turn in the conversation. That sounds intriguing. What cuisines are you drawing from? Some family recipes for starters. My grandmother was from Louisiana and she had a gumbo that could make grown men weep. Jasmine smiled at the memory, but elevated, of course, keeping the soul while adding Bellamy's refinement. For the next 20 minutes, they talked about food, about business, about the restaurant industry. Richard gradually relaxed, offering genuine insights from his years as a customer at high-end establishments across the country. Jasmine listened attentively, taking mental notes, seeing him perhaps for the first time as a potential asset, rather than just a difficult customer. When they finally emerged from the office, the restaurant was in full pre-lunch swing. Staff moved purposefully between stations, the kitchen hummed with activity, and the dining room gleamed in anticipation of the day's service. Catherine Wells, Richard's client from Friday night, was waiting near the host stand, checking her watch. Her eyebrows rose in surprise when she saw Richard emerging from the back with Jasmine. "Catherine, you're early," Richard said, crossing to greet her. "Traffic was lighter than expected," she replied, her eyes moving curiously between Richard and Jasmine. "Is everything okay?" "Better than okay," Richard said. "I was just having a meeting with the new owner of Bellamy's." He gestured to Jasmine with newfound respect in his voice. Catherine's eyes widened. "New owner?" She looked at Jasmine more closely, recognition dawning. "You're the server from Friday night." "Jasmine Williams," Jasmine introduced herself properly, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you under better circumstances, Ms. Wells." Catherine took her hand, a slow smile spreading across her face as she put the pieces together. "The pleasure is mine." She turned to Richard with an expression that said volumes about how his stock had fallen in her estimation after his behavior on Friday. "Richard didn't mention you owned the restaurant." "A recent development," Jasmine explained smoothly. "Today is actually my first official day as owner." "Well, congratulations," Catherine said warmly. "That's quite an achievement." Tyler approached, menus in hand. "Your usual table is ready, Mr. Thompson. For two?" "Yes, thank you," Richard replied, his tone noticeably more polite than his usual brusque acknowledgement. As Tyler led them away, Catherine glanced back at Jasmine with obvious respect and perhaps a hint of curiosity about the dynamic she had just witnessed. Jasmine watched them go, feeling a complex mix of emotions. The satisfaction of seeing Richard humbled was there, yes, but it wasn't the overwhelming triumph she might have expected. Instead, she felt something more nuanced, the weight of ownership, of responsibility not just for the restaurant's success but for the tone she would set going forward. Mr. Bellamy appeared at her side, following her gaze. "Not exactly how I imagined your first interaction as owner," he said quietly. "Thought there might be more fireworks." Jasmine smiled. "Fireworks are exciting but leave nothing behind. I'm more interested in building something lasting." "Wise words," Mr. Bellamy nodded approvingly. "So you're not going to ban him? Ban one of our most regular customers? That would be bad business." Jasmine's eyes twinkled. "Besides, I think having to face me across the table every Monday might be punishment enough for a while." Mr. Bellamy chuckled. "You're going to do just fine with this place." He patted her shoulder. "Better than fine. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to start clearing out that office. 40 years of accumulation doesn't pack itself." As he walked away, Jasmine took a moment to simply stand and observe her restaurant coming to life around her. The soft clink of silverware being arranged, the murmur of the first customers arriving, the rich aromas drifting from the kitchen, all of it familiar, yet entirely new when viewed through the lens of ownership. Lisa approached with a tablet showing the day's reservations. "Ready for your first lunch service as the boss?" Jasmine took a deep breath and nodded, straightening her shoulders. "Absolutely. Let's show them what Bellamy's is really about." 6 months flew by like pages torn from a calendar in an old movie. Summer faded into a brilliant autumn, and Bellamy's thrived under Jasmine's ownership. Small changes appeared gradually. New artwork featuring local artists. Subtle updates to the menu that honored traditional favorites while introducing fresh ideas and, most noticeably, a warmer atmosphere that made even first-time diners feel like regulars. The restaurant critics noticed too. The city's most influential food writer had visited incognito 3 weeks after Jasmine took over and published a glowing review titled, "New Blood, Same Soul, Bellamy's Renaissance." Reservations, already difficult to secure on weekends, now required planning weeks in advance. Behind the scenes, Jasmine had made practical changes that improved the staff's daily lives: better scheduling software that respected personal commitments, a revamped tip distribution system that the back-of-house staff appreciated, and a small but meaningful profit-sharing program. Turnover, always low at Bellamy's compared to industry standards, dropped to almost zero. On a crisp October evening, Jasmine stood near the bar, checking inventory numbers on her tablet while keeping an eye on the dining room. The dinner service hummed with the pleasant energy of a well-orchestrated symphony, servers moving with purpose between tables, the kitchen firing dishes with precise timing, guests leaning toward each other in conversation over candlelight. Richard Thompson sat at his usual corner table, but something about him had changed over the past months. His posture seemed more relaxed, his interactions with the staff more genuine. He still came for his Monday business lunches without fail, but he had also started appearing occasionally for dinner, sometimes alone with paperwork, sometimes with guests who didn't seem to be clients, actual friends. Perhaps tonight he was dining with Catherine Wells, whose marketing firm had eventually signed with his company. Their professional relationship had evolved into a friendship, something Richard had few of in his life. Jasmine had observed this development with interest, noting how Catherine seemed to bring out a better side of him. Deshawn, now promoted to head bartender, sidled up next to Jasmine. "Thompson's waving you over," he said, nodding toward the corner table. "Don't worry, he looks happy, not complainy." Jasmine smiled. "That's a change from the old days." She tucked her tablet under her arm and made her way across the dining room, stopping briefly at other tables to check on guests. "Jasmine," Richard greeted her with a warmth that still surprised her. "The duck special tonight is absolutely outstanding. Chef has outdone himself." "I'll pass along the compliment," Jasmine replied. "He's been experimenting with that cherry port reduction for weeks." Catherine raised her wine glass in appreciation. "The pairing suggestion was perfect, too. Your new sommelier knows his stuff." Jasmine corrected gently. "Anita joined us last month from that vineyard in Sonoma I was telling you about." "Right, of course," Catherine nodded. "My mistake," Richard cleared his throat. "Actually, we wanted to discuss something with you. Do you have a moment to join us?" Jasmine glanced around the restaurant, assessing whether she could step away. Seeing everything running smoothly, she pulled up a chair. "What's on your mind?" Richard and Catherine exchanged looks before he continued. "Catherine's firm has been working with the Downtown Business Association on a project to increase diversity among business owners in the city center." "I've seen the billboards." Jasmine nodded. "Good campaign, thanks," Catherine smiled. "But we wanted to do more than just talk about diversity. We wanted to actually create pathways for it to happen." Richard leaned forward. "We're launching a mentorship program for aspiring restaurant owners from underrepresented communities. People with talent and drive but without the connections or capital that make breaking into this industry so difficult." Jasmine felt a spark of interest. "That sounds like something worth supporting." "We were hoping for more than support," Catherine said. "We want you to be one of our lead mentors. Your journey from waitress to owner is exactly the kind of story that could inspire others. And not just inspire," Richard added. "You could provide practical guidance that most restaurant consultants simply don't have." "You've seen this business from every angle." Jasmine sat back, surprised by the request. "That's not what I expected you to ask." Richard's expression grew more serious. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have thought to ask, but watching you transform this place while maintaining everything that made it special has been eye-opening." He hesitated before adding, "And if I'm being completely honest, my perspective has changed in other ways too." "How so?" Jasmine asked, curious about this rare moment of vulnerability from him. Richard glanced around the dining room, at the diverse staff working seamlessly together, at the varied clientele enjoying their meals. "I used to think I understood this city, this industry. I had a very narrow view of who belonged where." He met Jasmine's gaze directly. "You prove me wrong, and I'm better for it." Catherine nodded approvingly. She had witnessed Richard's gradual transformation firsthand, had pushed him toward it in small ways during their many conversations over meals at Bellamy's. "The program launches in January," she explained. We've secured funding for 5 years with 10 mentees in each cohort. Each will receive business training, a small startup grant, and most importantly, regular guidance from established owners like yourself. I'd need to see more details, Jasmine said thoughtfully. My schedule is already packed and my first priority has to be Bellamy's. Of course, Richard agreed quickly. We have everything documented. And the time commitment would be flexible. Maybe one group session per month and individual meetings as needed. Jasmine tapped her fingers on the table, already thinking through the possibilities. Would the focus be specifically on restaurant ownership or food businesses more broadly? That's still being defined, Catherine admitted. We're hoping our lead mentors will help shape the program. A server approached with fresh drinks and conversation paused momentarily. When they were alone again, Jasmine made a decision. Send me the proposal, she said. I'm interested, but I'd like to add something to it. Richard raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind? Financial literacy training, Jasmine said firmly. When I was working my way up, I learned how to cook, how to serve, how to manage a floor. But no one taught me how to read a P&L statement or negotiate with a bank. I had to teach myself, and it nearly derailed my plan several times. Catherine was already typing notes into her phone. That's exactly the kind of insight we need. Anything else? Access to commercial real estate agents who won't waste their time. I lost count of how many wouldn't take my calls until I had Mr. Bellamy with me. Jasmine's expression was determined rather than bitter. These weren't complaints, but practical obstacles she wanted to help others overcome. Richard nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable as he recognized his own industry's biases. I know some people who could help with that. Good, Jasmine said. Because mentorship is valuable, but concrete resources and connections are what turn dreams into business plans. They continued discussing the program as they finished their drinks, the conversation flowing easily between three people who would have seemed unlikely allies just 6 months earlier. As Jasmine excused herself to check on the kitchen, Catherine smiled at the changes evident in both the restaurant and in Richard himself. 3 weeks later, on a Sunday when the restaurant was closed, Jasmine hosted the first informal gathering of potential mentors for the program. She had invited several other restaurant owners from across the city, representing diverse cuisines and business models. They sat around pushed-together tables in Bellamy's dining room, sharing stories and ideas over coffee and pastries from local bakeries. Richard arrived last, carrying folders with the updated proposal, incorporating everyone's suggestions from previous email exchanges. He had become unexpectedly passionate about the project, leveraging his business connections to secure additional funding and support. As the discussion unfolded, one of the other restaurant owners, a woman who had opened her Filipino fusion restaurant just 2 years ago after a successful food truck, asked the question that had been on several minds. So, Richard, what made you want to champion this particular cause? Not exactly what people would expect from... She trailed off, trying to find a diplomatic way to finish her sentence. From someone like me? Richard finished for her with a self-deprecating smile. You can say it. From a middle-aged white guy who spent his career in investment banking. The group chuckled, the tension broken. Let's just say I had a humbling experience that opened my eyes. Richard continued, glancing at Jasmine. I was forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about my own assumptions and behavior. Jasmine observed him with quiet appreciation. His transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't always been smooth. There had been moments of backsliding, of tone-deaf comments quickly retracted, but the effort had been genuine, the growth real. I think we all have those moments, she offered. The question is what we do afterward. Richard nodded gratefully. Exactly. I could have just found another restaurant for my Monday lunches. Instead, I chose to learn and change. He straightened the papers in front of him, becoming businesslike again. Now let's talk about the application process for our first cohort. As the meeting progressed, Jasmine stepped away briefly to take a call from her produce supplier. When she returned, she paused in the doorway, taking in the scene before her. This diverse group of successful restaurant owners and business leaders gathered in her dining room, all committed to creating opportunities for others. The journey from that humiliating night when Richard had berated her in front of the entire restaurant to this moment of collaboration seemed almost unbelievable. Yet here they were, proof that people could surprise you. that relationships could evolve in unexpected ways, and that sometimes the most meaningful transformations happened not through confrontation, but through connection. Jasmine rejoined the group, sliding into her seat at the head of the table. "So," she said with quiet authority, "where were we?"